The famous essayist and author of the dystopian novel 1984 once said, "If people cannot write well, they cannot think well, and if they cannot think well, others will do the thinking for them." Hey everybody, Christopher here, and I got a very nice response from my Instagram posts. Yes, I'm on Instagram, so I hope you're following me there. I had posted a bunch of photos of authors and thinkers who I admire and who have influenced my work as a writer. I got a message from an artist friend of mine, and he asked if I could give recommendations on some good how to write books. He said, "Can you give like your top 3?" And I can't because I can give so many more than just my top 3. I'll start at the top, but full disclosure, this isn't just going to be a list of how to write books. This is going to be first off the how to write stuff, but then we're going to go into some of the books that I think will help you think about writing, because writing it's a strange animal. So, like I said, it was an artist friend of mine, a very talented painter, who actually was my art teacher before I was an art teacher. And it made me kind of start thinking about writing in terms of how you can know if you're doing a good job or a bad job. Because with a painting, it's very easy to see if something is not working. It's also easy to see when something maybe isn't right anatomically or perspective-wise, but is still working in a different kind of way. But with writing, it's much harder to just point to something. You can, like when you're teaching someone how to paint, you can just point and say, "Look, the perspective is wrong here," or these colors aren't working, or this is getting kind of muddy. And people who aren't artists at all can look at your work and decide if it's doing something for them or not. With writing, it's much more complicated because you can only go word by word. Is this rocket science? Is this brain surgery? No, of course not. But it is just as hard to really write something that is packed with, I don't know what you would call it, but with value, with emotional resonance, to make it all interconnect, tie in together, be coherent, and really resonate with the reader. That is just as complicated, just as difficult as some of the sciences, whether it be medical science or rocket science. And I know that may sound hyperbolic, but it is absolutely true. You are dealing with your audience on a psychological level. You are engaging yourself on a psychological level. And if you are not honest with yourself, if you do not understand the human condition, the realities that we live in, then you cannot mimic them in fiction. You cannot produce fantasy that still seems to ring true for your audience. So my other book recommendations as I go down this list are going to be books that help you to do that, to help you to understand the human condition and help you to connect with yourself and be true to what you're trying to convey in your writing. So I will explain more what I mean as I get into those books. So without further ado, here's the list. Now, a lot of people are probably going to expect me to recommend books like Save the Cat by Blake Snyder. I think it's Blake Snyder. Yes, Blake Snyder. I understand the Save the Cat formula, and I'm not against it. I'll say yes. Go ahead and get Save the Cat. Oh, by the way, I should mention I'm going to leave affiliate links in the description below. Please, if you decide to order any of these books, please order them through my affiliate links because it does help to support the channel. But anyway, so Save the Cat, yes, it's good to understand structure, your kind of conventional plot structure that a lot of people would call formulaic. I have nothing against formulaic. A lot of great stuff has been done within a formula. It's like learning a recipe. You can learn a recipe and then you can have your own way of doing the recipe, or you can shake that recipe up in different ways, but you still have to stick to the recipe. You can't, you can, just like you can have a formula for a story and produce different kinds of stories, you can have a formula for pancakes and produce different kind of pancakes. But if you don't use that formula at all, you're going to get something that's nothing like pancakes. And so it is possible to get something that is nothing like a story. But is it a recommend? Yes, but we're gonna dive a little deeper into how to. Well, it comes down to that old saying: you have to understand the rules before you can break them. So Save the Cat's kind of a formula. It's kind of a set of rules that people can use to produce good stories. But I'm not actually placing that on my list of recommendations. I'm just commenting that book exists and it's not a bad book, but let's get beyond that. So let's get into my first top recommendation for the kind of how to write, and that is Story by Robert McKee. Robert McKee said something in that book that has really resonated with me, stuck with me for everything that I write. And he mentioned something that writers will kind of note at a certain point, that it's like their characters take over. They ask their characters, what is it that you want to do, or what are you going to do? And it's almost like they're discovering that the characters are acting on their own. This can feel like a very spiritual experience, like you're tapping into something that is in the subconscious or maybe outside of yourself. And, well, yes and no. I'll get into the yeses with the other recommendations, but essentially what Robert McKee said is, this is what happens when you become so informed by your story, by the act of discovering your characters in your story. You're so informed about who they are, what their desires are, what their quirks are, their wants and their needs, and the environment that they live in. You keep going over it and over it again. You do research, you study, you write, you rewrite. You become so informed that on the in your brain and the subconscious level, it kind of becomes natural. It just rolls out of you what they would do or say. So it kind of feels like it's not coming from you, but it actually is. It's coming from being informed. So there's all sorts of great writing insights like that in Robert McKee's story. Robert McKee is very good at laying out how to plot, how to write dialogue. Matter of fact, he has 2 other books. I haven't read them, but I'm sure they're great, so I'll mention them here too. One is called Storynomics, and the other one is called Dialogue. So it's all about just writing dialogue, which is another really challenging thing, because dialogue is one of those things where you want to inform the audience, and so you just start having the characters say out loud what you want the audience to know. And that's kind of goes into the show don't tell arena, where, I so many people, and I've been guilty of this in the past myself, write dialogue where there should be one sentence, there's 5. And those 5 are to make sure that the audience gets what you want them to know. That's a big story no-no. Anyway, so Robert McKee's Story, excellent starter book. That's the book I would tell everyone to start with. It was recommended to me by Chris Young, who I'm working with on Brimstone Saint. And Chris writes great scripts, so there you go. Next book, number 2, Zen and the Art of Writing, by Ray Bradbury. And I also recommend Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Repair. Now, that was a very famous book, and I think it's... I probably should have put it on this list, but I'm not prepared to talk about it, so I won't. But I'll put a link in the description. But Zen and the Art of Writing is kind of a riff on the title Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Repair. And it's Ray Bradbury, one of my favorite one of my favorite writers. Most famous for Fahrenheit 451, The Martian Chronicles, personal beloved favorite of mine, From the Dust Returns. Very important author. I recommend you read those books as well. But Zen in the Art of Writing is all about Ray Bradbury's approach. I will boil his approach down to simply, he had a saying, he said, I throw up in the morning and I clean it up in the afternoon. Essentially, again, he was someone who was very informed of what kind of characters he was attracted to, what kind of stories he wanted to tell. He would explore ideas, essentially laying down just words or thoughts, or most famously, in my mind at least, he was walking with his wife, and there was a broken down roller coaster on the beach, and to him it looked like dinosaur bones. And he said, gee, I wonder how that dinosaur got washed up on shore. And that inspired him to create a story called The Foghorn, which, in addition to, I think there was a foghorn on that beach that he was hearing. So he put 2 and 2 together and thought, wow, this was an ancient dinosaur that was like a plesiosaurus or something that was in the ocean. It heard the call of the foghorn, which sounded to him like a call of a possible mate, and it came to shore to explore where that call was coming from. So, he gets these ideas and he just writes them out, and then he edits, he cleans up in the afternoon. That's what he means. But it's a wonderful book on writing. It is my number 2 recommendation. Number 3, The Poetics by Aristotle. Now, Aristotle was one of the great philosophers. I could go on and on about who he was, but I would rather you discover it yourself. Aristotle, Socrates, Plato, the great philosophers are very much worth checking out. They're interesting because they're going off of information that they had at the time, but they still came to some really wonderful conclusions, and they are part of what Western civilization is based on today. But what's very interesting about the Poetics is Aristotle, there used to be, even back then, there was theater. That was the major mode of entertainment. This is before the modern novel. Modern novel's only about 400 years old, believe it or not. Before the modern novel, theater was the thing, or oral storytelling. You would go to see someone stand in front of you and recount a tale or an epic poem, and people would write that stuff down so it would be passed on through the generations. But again, the modern novel is only about 400 years old. So I digress. The Aristotle would go to these plays, and he would note which plays worked and which plays didn't. And I'm not just talking about for him, but he would observe the audience. He would see what the audience responded to, when they were getting bored, when they laughed, when they cried. And he kind of came up with this kind of critical theory about what was hitting them on an emotional level, what was engaging them, and that became the Poetics. So the Poetics, it's not that long, but it's very dense. There's a lot to unpack in it. I have read it 3 or 4 times now, and I'm still interpreting it. I'm still kind of it's got a lot of information in it, and you're not going to understand it all at once, but it is definitely worth your time and trying to deconstruct in your own mind so you understand what he was getting at. So next, The Hero with 1,000 Faces by Joseph Campbell. Now, I've talked before on my channel about the hero's journey, And it's people have kind of mistaken it for a formula. It's not actually a book on writing. What it is it's, again, just like Aristotle's Poetics, Joseph Campbell kind of observed that there are reoccurring themes in your basic hero story or mythology. There were reoccurring archetypes, like the hero, the mentor, the skeptic, the temptation character. This has been broken down many times by other people. There's a program called Dramatica, which actually, it's funny. Dramatica is kind of this writing program that's meant to help you kind of compartmentalize all of these heroes' journeys elements. I actually hate the program. I've found that it stalls me up, but it is kind of interesting. There's a little booklet that comes with a little comic book that has some good information in it. But the program itself, I don't know. Other people have raved about it. The stories I've seen written around it kind of bored me a little bit. I wanted to like them, mainly because I wanted to like the person that wrote them, but just kind of, I don't know. So the program's not a recommend for me, but maybe other people have better results for it. But The Hero with a Thousand Faces essentially helps you to understand what the hero's journey is, who the archetypal characters are within each hero's journey. This, of course, is most famously used by George Lucas when he created Star Wars, Luke Skywalker being the hero, Obi-Wan Kenobi being the mentor, Han Solo being the skeptic, Chewbacca being the kind of emotional character, R2-D2 and C-3PO being the comic relief, Princess Leia being the maiden, things like the call to action, the supernatural intervention, the descent into the depths, into the chasm, the void or hell, and then the reemergence, the rebirth, and bringing that new knowledge that comes with that to bear on the story problem, conquering it, and then returning home. So there's more to it than that. I'm kind of shooting from the hip here. But Hero with a Thousand Faces, another great recommendation. So getting a little bit more nebulous, Stephen King's On Writing. Now, this is a book that is very interesting because it has, in my opinion, some very good information and some very bad information for writers. There is some horrible advice in this book, in my opinion. Why am I recommending it? Well, most books on writing, I had this conversation with Clint Carney, who loves this book and is a huge Stephen King fan and a very good writer and filmmaker himself. But this is Stephen King talking about how he writes. And why I recommend it is there actually is some very good brass tacks advice on just the practicalities of writing, general rookie mistakes that people make, annoying little idiosyncratic things that a lot of new writers do that are very obvious to more seasoned writers, and so you can avoid them. It's also very inspirational. He tells the story of how he just wrote and became the writer he is now. My favorite of his stories is he got rejection letter after rejection letter trying to write stories, and by his own admission, he thought to himself, like, okay, like I'm no good yet, but instead of focusing on getting my first acceptance, which, I'm going to write a lot of stories before I get that would be very demoralizing. So what he decided to do was he was going to make it like a hobby to collect rejection letters. And he starts putting them on this spike. He gets so many rejection letters that he actually fills up the spike. And so he has to get, I think he said something like a railroad spike or something like that. So he's putting rejection letter after rejection letter on this railroad spike until one day he's so caught up in collecting these rejection letters, he's surprised to get an acceptance. And I can't remember which story that was. I do remember him talking about the first story that he realized he actually wrote something good, which I won't spoil. Get that book. It's also fun to get that one on audio and listen to Stephen King read it to you. So yeah, On Writing by Stephen King is a recommend. Getting into the more not about writing, but books I think are going to help you become a better writer. Man and His Symbols by Carl Jung. I'm also going to recommend another book, his final book called The Red Book, which is his personal spiritual journey. So why am I recommending, kids are jumping around upstairs. Why am I recommending books that aren't quite books on writing, but they are, Man and His Symbols is essentially, it's kind of like the answer to Freud's interpretation of dreams. Man and His Symbol helps you understand human archetypes, why they exist, and how they are not. This kind of this popular idea these days that I completely reject, that Western society is this kind of construct that we came up with to, like we just sat down and came up with this set of rules. No. The rules and archetypes that we generally live by, that govern us, come from nature. They come from what's going on inside of our head. We can try and rail against those things, but ultimately we're railing against our own impulses and the instincts that drive us on a primal level, and go all the way up into our conscious mind, from the subconscious to the conscious. Carl Jung helps you to understand what those mechanisms are. Writing is very much about understanding the human mechanisms and using those mechanisms to get ideas across to our audience, which, if done properly, can be very spiritual, both for the writer and for the audience. But first, it has to be spiritual for the writer. The writer has to connect to something within himself or herself that is true, that is honest. And Carl Jung's works will help you to understand what those are. I also will I'll segue a little bit into check out J.R.R. Tolkien, most famous for The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings. The reason that I say that is there's a lot of similarities in what Tolkien writes and what Carl Jung was exploring. And Tolkien, it's not enough it's not even close to enough to watch the Lord of the Rings movies, which I really enjoy, but they are not the books. You're seeing the actions of the books transpire in the film, but what you're not getting is you're not getting the beautiful use of language. You're not getting the deep dive into the spirituality of J.R.R. Tolkien, and Carl Jung will help you to understand that. They are very similar, very spiritual stuff that I absolutely love, and they will help you to kind of seek within yourself things that you wouldn't otherwise discover. Carl Jung talks very much about the id, the anima and the animus, the shadow self. These are all things that you need to understand if you're going to write characters properly and if you're going to write something that is true to yourself. I'll segue a little bit here for a few moments. When you write, you are trying to create something of value. And if you do not believe what you are writing has value, then there's no reason that any audience should be bothered to read it, because your audience is seeking things of value. The things you should not be seeking to write are if you've got an axe to grind, You see that that's what the internet is. People with an axe to grind who just like, I'm just going to type out what I think is, wrong with the world, or type out how I think other people should think, or type out, I'm going to make a meme that tells stupid people that they're stupid and I'm smart. That is not what you are doing as a writer. You have to let go of all that, and you have to have faith, real faith in your art. And that is faith that when you write, you are exploring something within yourself, and you have to understand both the good and the bad within yourself, and you have to work that out on the page. And you have to be as honest as possible. And you think to yourself, how can I be honest when I'm writing fiction? But no, you have to create something that is honest. Even when you're creating a fictional story, you have to be honest with your audience. You have to play fair. If you set up story rules or things become informed about your characters, you can't deviate from that. You have to see that through. And you have to explore it from every side possible and be honest about that. If you're going to just write something because you have to tell people what you think they should think, then you're just writing propaganda. And that's not helping you either, because what you're doing essentially is you're just working to assert what you've already decided. And if you've already decided it, then you're just, you might as well just be holding a sign on a street corner saying the end of the world is nigh. It's a cynical and narcissistic way of doing things. If you have trouble with your mother-in-law and all you're going to do is write story after story about your mother-in-law judging you, then that just means you've got an axe to grind with the mother-in-law. That's not writing. That's just bitching on a page, and it's boring. Sorry, but it is. So, yes, Man and His Symbols, Carl Jung. I'm going to also recommend the next couple of books I'm going to recommend are about writing comic books. Now, writing comic books and writing any other story generally have the same structure, but writing comic books, that's an entirely different story vocabulary. What I mean is the tool set and the mechanisms that work within a comic book are different than work in a novel or a movie script. But it very much helps to understand the mechanisms of every medium of writing, because then you can understand where it's appropriate to spend your energy in writing, and where you're using the wrong tools for the wrong job. So, for instance, with a comic book, when someone speaks, it takes up space on a page. You have a certain amount of space on every single page to have characters do as much as you need them to, and then you have to turn the page. So you have to, as I explained in another video, which is on my YouTube channel here, called something to the effect of, should I turn my screenplay into a comic book? Sorry, I forgot to turn the notifications off on my phone. Anyway, sorry, I lost my train of thought there for a second. I got distracted by the notification. But anyway, so let me get to the recommendations. And you should, even if you don't intend to write comic books, you should check these books out anyway, because it'll help you understand that there are different tool sets for different mediums, and understanding those tools will help you decide which ones to use and when. So, Writing for Comics by Alan Moore. This is a very short essay on writing comics. I think it's available through Avatar Press. Again, I'll look for it and leave a link in the description below. Great little piece of writing advice and information by one of the great masters of writing in the 20th century, Alan Moore, who wrote The Watchmen, From Hell, League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, wrote Swamp Thing. He wrote for DC Comics. He wrote for Image Comics. He's written for his own stuff. And now I believe he's on to working on independent movies. So we'll see how that works out, because it's always interesting to see how a great writer in one medium translates into another. Next recommendation, Understanding Comics by Scott McCloud. Understanding Comics is very interesting because it's kind of a deconstructionist look on creating comic books. It essentially takes, it's like the whole idea of the curious child who takes apart his dad's drill because he wants to know how it works. Well, that's what Understanding Comics is. It takes apart the medium of comics to kind of piece by piece unveil the mechanisms, and it shows a little bit of how deconstructionism has presented comic books with certain devices, and how when you reconstruct those things, you get wonderful comic book stories. I personally believe that comic books are one of the greatest storytelling mediums ever invented by man. It takes all the different storytelling mechanisms of visual, like movies, theatrical, novels. It's so flexible how much it can kind of oscillate between all the different mechanisms, all the different tools of all the different mediums. So I do recommend those books. Next, we're going to get a little more nebulous. I'm going to recommend the essays of George Orwell. George Orwell, who I quoted at the beginning of this video, was one of the 20th century's great essayists. He lived through the Spanish Civil War. He experienced the horrors of both communism and fascism. And essentially, and he does in his essays, he talks about writing as well. But the reason that I'm recommending this is, again, you have to be aware of the human condition. You have to understand what makes people do the things they do. You have to understand the errors in their thinking. You have to understand when they shy away from the fact that they could be capable of evil, that they do have a shadow self, going back to Carl Jung. And I should have mentioned that before about Carl Jung, because it does tie into not only Tolkien, but George Orwell. The reason that we experience so many atrocities in the world regularly is not because people decide to be evil, but because they deny that they're capable of evil. And so therefore they're able to tell themselves that everything they do has a moral justification. Many of the horrible things that you see happening in this day and age and in every age were committed by people, are being committed by people who believe that they are right. They believe that they are fully justified in throwing a punch, and they will tell you all the reasons why they are. They have no problem torching people's businesses that they've never met before and don't have anything to do with the grievance that they claim that they have. And they see themselves as kind of like the hero of their own story without ever realizing that they are committing horrible acts. Or they do realize that they're committing horrible acts, and they do realize that they're committing the same horrible acts that they believe the people they're fighting against are doing, but they are able to compartmentalize it and excuse it, justify it, explain it away, or even forget that they did it at all. And that is the price of denying your shadow self. With Carl Jung, he was very much into the idea of confronting your shadow self, because if you confront it, if you acknowledge it's there, you can begin to discipline yourself and control it instead of it controlling you. George Orwell was very good at, and I don't believe he was ever familiar with Carl Jung. If he was, I'm not aware of it, but I don't think so. George Orwell was very much the guy that understood what happened when you didn't confront your shadow self. When you ignore it, it grows and it controls you. And so most of his stories, most of his essays were about people who really wanted to believe that they were in the right and did horrible things without ever realizing it. Animal Farm, 1984, his essays, this one that I'm really uh, The Road to, what is it? I'll find it and I'll leave it in the description. But if you read George Orwell, you will understand this. Same again with Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury. I could go on with those recommendations. There's also a book. This isn't part of my. There's a couple of books I'll also recommend on top of that aren't actually part of my list, but they go along with this. One is the Gulag Archipelago. I forget the name of the author. Essentially, someone who fought for the Russian army in World War II and then came home only to be arrested by the Communist Party and thrown in a gulag with a bunch of other Russian loyalists, and realized that he had created the very monster that had eaten him. And so he wrote about his experiences. A true story. He wrote about his experiences and the same kind of thing. These people who believed that they were absolutely morally justified in the horrors that they committed. The other one would be Ordinary Men. Again, I forget the author, but Ordinary Men is the story of people my age, people in their 40s who weren't young enough to be indoctrinated into the Nazi propaganda, but how they were, went from being ordinary men to people who were regularly dragging people out of their homes naked, including pregnant women, and shooting them in the back of the head in a field. These were not people that considered themselves bad. They weren't even loyal to, some cause. They were just, people that didn't realize how easy it was to be pulled into their evil deeds. Now, this all seems like very dark stuff, but if you're going to be a writer, you have to understand the darkness within yourself, the how easy it is to be controlled by your impulses and be selfish. And you also have to understand what it means to be a hero. How in confronting that stuff and confronting that darkness, like in the hero's journey, going down into the depths and coming back up from it, you will understand a bit more about yourself, which will help you relate to other people and watch how they behave. I mean, watching human behavior is the best way to become a writer, I guess. Anyway, enough about that. Last recommendation is The Wrong Way Home by Jay Deacon. Diekman, sorry. The Wrong Way Home is about cults. It's about the cult mentality. There's a misnomer that people who become part of a cult are stupid people. No. Very smart people, very intelligent, very smart people can be indoctrinated into a cult very easily. It lays out kind of the 4 fundamental things that every cult does to indoctrinate people. And again, the reason why I want to recommend a book like this is because cults prey on those human mechanisms, that if you're not aware of those mechanisms, they will control you. Well, if other people are aware of the mechanisms in your own head that you are not, they're able to tap into those and get full control out of you, full loyalty. None of us are immune to it. I've fallen prey to this myself, and breaking free of it is very emotionally distressing. It causes a lot of conflict, and people don't like conflict. But I mean, I managed to do it. Doesn't mean I'm myself am still not able to get sucked back into that. People want to belong. They want to please others. They want to get the approval of a judge and a redeemer, and that's what, that can be anything from a role model, and it's fine to have a healthy role model, or it can be a cult leader, or it can be a dictator, or it can be an ideological cause. But again, the reason that I want to recommend these things, the reason why it's so important to read about these things and understand these things, understand the mechanisms of psychology, understand the mechanisms of groupthink, cults, ideologies, is because these are all things that are motivating and moving us along on a daily basis. They are things that we are struggling against, that are, they're all based on the human mechanisms of our mind. And if you are, again, if you are writing and you are understanding these things and you are aware of them and you're really thinking and you're able to, I don't want to say combat them, but you're able to deal with them in a healthy and mature way that will help you to grow. It will help your readers to grow. And, it becomes an amazing experience. There's a reason right now why, people are trying to ban books and burn books and tear down statues and all that sort of thing. It's because those are the things that if you engage them, if you engage their history, for better or worse, for beautiful or for ugly, they will get you thinking. And if you can think and if your audience can think, then that makes you more difficult to control, because people who try and control you want you not thinking. That's cults. That's ideologies. So, yeah, this is what it means to write, what it means to read. It's not just about telling stories. It's about connecting with your audience on an emotional and spiritual level. And whether you want to create schlocky science fiction or horror like I love to do, or you want to write the next dystopian novel, or you want to express your love of some other subject matter like painting, for example, or nature, whatever, you need to understand the mechanisms that create the emotional resonance, so you can share this experience. It's like being psychic. You're having a conversation with someone that you will never meet in real life, but you put something down on a page or the screen that generates the same or similar images in their mind, similar emotions in their mind that you're having in your own. But you can't do that unless you're able to explore within yourself what it is that makes it so important, so spiritual, so gratifying to you. So that I'm making really long videos lately. Man, this is almost as long as my last video, the story of the previous video, which was about my journey creating my movie, The Quantum Terror, and how it was inspired by Alec Gillis's Harbinger Down, which I've still got the stuff making that. I wrote a book about the making of Harbinger Down, and Alec wrote this movie and directed it, and it means something to him. And even though Alec probably doesn't see it, I tried to say what I saw in the movie, but there's a lot about Alec in this movie that I don't even think Alec realized he put in there. And there's a lot about people in the movies that they make. So, once you learn to write, once you understand these mechanisms, and based on the books I recommended, you'll be experiencing other people's writing and other people's movies in new ways that you never realized were possible. It's like discovering a new color or something like that. It's like opening the third eye. So anyway, thank you so much for watching. Again, if you decide to purchase any of these books, please do so through the affiliate links down below in the description of this video. That helps to support my work, and I really appreciate that. Be sure to, as always, make sure that you're subscribed. If you have already subscribed, make sure you're still subscribed. Hit the notification bell so you get updates, like the video, share it, leave a comment. I love engaging you guys. I love when I get messages from you guys asking me questions like this. Follow me on Instagram, where I've been posting about these people, as well as one person I didn't mention is Yuri Bazmanov. who was a Russian defector. He also kind of taps into this stuff. But on my Instagram, I post my kind of daily thoughts or updates on what I'm working on. So thanks for watching, and I'll be back with probably some simpler subject matter and shorter videos. But if you made it through this one, thanks for hanging in there. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll be back with more content.